All right, so in this video, we're going to go over the etiology of sexual dysfunction. So if we look at the etiology of sexual dysfunction, one of the leading models, that's one of the oldest models, comes from Masters and Johnson. Remember, they were some of the pioneering researchers on sexual functioning and did quite some interesting research. Some of their methods are a little bit out there, but anyway, from their research, they came up with the two-tier model, and they said that there are both proximal or immediate causes of sexual dysfunction and distal. One of the biggest problems, and I've already kind of touched on this in previous videos with sexual dysfunction, is when people quit being fully present in the sexual experience when they're having sex. Specifically, they either take on fears about performance, so they're worried that they're not good lovers or in their head instead of actually just experiencing having sex, or they adopt a spectator role, which is kind of being, again, outside of it. So not necessarily worrying about their performance, but more of an observational role instead of being fully present in the moment. So those are the proximal or the immediate effects that can lead to sexual dysfunction according to Masters and Johnson. They also talked about distal causes of sexual dysfunction, and these are things that are more removed. So these are things like sociocultural influences. So if someone has been taught to have negative views about sex, for example, if someone has been taught that the only reason to ever have sex is to have a baby, then they're much more likely to have sexual dysfunction. So that can be a cultural influence, right? Biological causes. So there are a lot of different biological causes that can lead to sexual dysfunction or increase its likelihood. We'll hit those in a minute. And the last one that Masters and Johnson talked about being more historical or distal causes of sexual dysfunction are sexual traumas. So here's a more full list of things that we know can lead to sexual dysfunction. There's a lot of them. So if we look at the biological ones, smoking is horrible for your health in multiple ways, including it increases your sexual dysfunctions. Heavy drinking, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neurological diseases, hormone dysfunction, SSRI medications, so antidepressants greatly increase sexual dysfunction, and other medical illnesses and medications. Now, the DSM separates out sexual dysfunction caused by medical conditions into that's not considered part of these sexual dysfunctions. However, that has been strongly criticized because one, a lot of the treatments are similar, although they can definitely have that biological component instead. But two, everything's biopsychosocial. Remember, that's kind of the model of mental illness is there's a biological piece. So it kind of takes that piece out, which, like I said, there's a lot of disagreement on that. Okay, so we go to some social factors that can lead to sexual dysfunction. Histories of rape and sexual abuse are very common among people who have sexual dysfunction, unfortunately. Lack of opportunity to learn about sexuality. Like I said, we're a hypersexual culture that actually doesn't teach about normal human sexual response and normal sexual behavior, right? And people don't talk about sex. They talk about everything else, from what they like to eat to their preferences and color schemes to their preferences and sports to their preferences in everything. And then they just expect the other person magically understand what they like when it comes to sex. So that's very unhealthy. So lack of opportunity. Relationship difficulties. Many women report that relationship difficulties lead to sexual dysfunction. This is also impacts men, but not to the same degree. And then negative cultural attitudes towards sex. So let's go with the psychological ones. Depression and anxiety definitely increase rates of sexual dysfunction, not just because of the medication, but if we look at just sexual dysfunction in general, we see a lot more of it. Some people, there's a lot of research, for example, looking at the impact of low serotonin levels impacting, leading to erectile dysfunction, for example. There's a lot of research on that right now. Low physiological arousal and exhaustion, right? If you've worked all day and you're just exhausted and tired, that can definitely increase uh, sexual dysfunction. Negative cognitions and self-blame, really fascinating research on this. Remember, sexual dysfunction, having a hiccup in this sexual experience is actually really normal. But then what do you think about it? If you get into your head, it tends to lead to more problems. So people who attribute their lack of sexual functioning to the moment. I was really stressed today, I was really tired today, I'm really upset today, whatever the case may be, tend to not have negative outcomes later. People who attribute the sexual dysfunction to themselves, that there's something wrong with themselves, are much more likely to have sexual dysfunction in the future. So negative cognitions and self-blame, and then taking on that spectator role and having performance fears all increase sexual dysfunction. Okay, so biological factors, I've already mentioned this. The DSM separates them out, and that's controversial. I already said that. Uh, there are a lot of different things that can be biological causes, right? One of the big things that doctors do when assessing for why someone's having sexual dysfunction is assess for hormone levels, right? So I need to address that. Obviously, taking anabolic steroids or testosterone supplements can cause problems. Okay. We already mentioned this one: history of rape, sexual abuse, absence of positive sexual experiences, relationship problems, depression, anxiety. We've already hit a lot of this. We're not going to cover them again. So let's talk about the activity real quick. This is going to be a very brief video. Childhood sexual abuse is a major problem. Is a major problem. So for this activity, find information on how parents should respond to CSA to minimize the negative impacts associated with CSA. Give the APA style reference for this information. I'm not requiring you to find a research article, but make sure it's from a trusted site. So yeah, check your site, make sure it's a trusted site. But how should parents respond? So it shouldn't be someone's like blog opinion thing. Make sure it's actually good information. And this is super important because the more research we see on this, the more it's really important what happens after, right? So there are certain things that we know are going to are more likely to predict negative outcomes, such as when there's violence combined with the sexual abuse, threats associated with the sexual abuse, the frequency of the sexual abuse, if it involves penetration, all those different things can lead to worse outcomes for someone. If you think about this, most sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone who knows and is trusted by the child, and so you can see why this can lead to such horrible outcomes. But the more research that's done on this, the more we know that the way parents respond to this is going to make a huge difference for these kids. And I just want to get on my soapbox for just a minute on this, and then we'll keep going. But I am a big advocate for educating kids on being safe when it comes to sexual abuse. Okay. My wife was a victim of sexual abuse. She doesn't mind me sharing that. And victim's the wrong word. She's a survivor because she's not a victim in any way. But anyway, she experienced sexual abuse during her childhood. And she was not well educated about protecting herself. And there were certain things I wish would have went different in her experience. So I don't want my kids to have that same experience. So I do things to minimize the risk of them being the victims of childhood sexual abuse. And among those things is they're educated with the appropriate words that go with their sexual organs, right? And they're educated on what to do if someone tries to touch them or hurt them in some way in a sexual form. So because of this, I'll just give a real quick story. My daughter, when she was a couple of years ago, so was she still in elementary school? Middle school, right in that 5th, 6th grade age time period. I can't remember which one. But there was a boy in her class who has quite a few issues, and he was going around and groping girls. He was grabbing their breasts during recess. And he ran up and grabbed my daughter's friend, and then he went to grab my daughter. And my daughter slapped his hands away and yelled at him, "Don't touch my breasts," and ran to a teacher because she was educated on exactly what to do. And when she went to the teacher, she said, "So-and-so tried to touch my breasts." And she had no issue saying that because we had practice, so she knew what to do. So, still a traumatic experience, but not nearly as traumatic for my daughter as for some of the other girls who experienced what this boy was doing, right? My only frustration was that the school didn't contact me and I didn't find out until my daughter got home from school, but that's a whole nother story. I talked to the school, we worked it out. But anyway, just really important to do that education piece with your kids. So Anyway, let's see. I think that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will move on to treatment in the next video.